Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Troublemakers for Justice. Today our topic is voter suppression tactics, and we have a guest speaker with us. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Thank you very much for having me on. My name is Jo Swanger, and I'm the Director of Peace and Global Studies at Earlham College. I teach peace studies and I teach Latin American history, and I think I'm being requested to be on this because I have a lot of canvassing experience and a lot of voter registration drives and that kind of thing, just in my off time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Jo helped us, the CSJ, out with election registrations for people today, or this semester, so we're lucky to have them. Kind of just want to start and get your simple definition of what voter suppression is.
Okay.
Because I feel like a lot of people may not even be aware of the topic in general.
Okay. So voter suppression is anything that tries to discourage people from voting one way or another. So that can be anything from making it physically difficult for them to vote. It can be making it difficult for them to register to vote, or perhaps even more insidious than that would be making people think it's not even worthwhile to vote. So why bother voting? Yeah. That too is a voter suppression tactic. I think that's the biggest one that we face in this country. But the other ones are growing. So making it harder for people to register, making it harder for people to actually vote. Those are both growing as voter suppression tactics.
Do you think they've grown specifically with this election coming up, or just in more recent years?
I think we've seen the voter suppression grow in the last 10 or so years. And I think a lot of it has been very explicit Republican strategy, although they don't talk about it openly in public. They talk about it amongst themselves.
Yeah.
So they plan ways to suppress the vote, because the common knowledge that's been true for the last probably 30 years or 40 years is that when the vote turnout is high, Democrats tend to win, or progressive policies tend to win. And when it's low, Republicans tend to win. And I should say, I'm not partisan here. I'm an independent. I do tend to vote Democratic, but I myself am to the left of the Democratic Party, so just full disclosure there. But yeah, I think definitely we're seeing it step up right now for the 2024 election. There have been a couple of instances even of ballot boxes getting set on fire. There was one I heard of today in the state of Washington. That is, I don't want to get people super alarmed about that, because it could also be another voter suppression tactic, even to say, wait a second, the ballot box is going to be set on fire. Because if you talk about ballot boxes getting set on fire, that in itself can be about sowing doubt in the validity and integrity and legitimacy of the election and how it was played out. So you can see how that too can feed into a voter suppression tactic. Yeah.
I know for myself, because we go to school in Indiana, but I'm an Ohio resident. I tried to do the whole absentee ballot method, and I was shut down very quickly.
Yep.
They were basically like, yeah, you're gonna have to come home, or you're not gonna be able to vote at all. Would you say that is a part of the voter suppression tactics?
Absolutely, that's a voter suppression tactic. So one of the problems that we face in the United States is that each state runs their elections differently. Okay, so we don't have federalized elections, and people outside the country are shocked and horrified by this, that there's such leeway within any given state to run the elections the way they want to. So it gives states like Ohio, like Indiana, which are both under Republican supermajorities in the legislature, it gives them a chance to do all kinds of voter suppression tactics. So one example, the one you're pointing to, is like absentee ballots. Do we even have access to an absentee ballot?
Yeah.
Because in Indiana, you have to have very set, specified reasons to even request an absentee ballot. For example, a physical disability that's going to prevent you from getting into the voting day, you know, or something along those lines. They have narrowed down the reasons why you could even request an absentee ballot. Other things that we see are, you know, in the 2020 election, the U.S. Postal Service was slowing down the mail. They were removing mail processing machines from the U.S. Postal Service so that people who had mail-in ballots were having trouble complying necessarily with the rules, because a lot of states will say, your ballot doesn't count unless it's postmarked by this particular date. If you can set that into law and then slow down the mail, well then you obviously have an advantage, right? So that's a big one. Just making it difficult for people to vote. So here's another one. The election day on a Tuesday in the middle of the work week, you know, you set your hours. So some polls will open at 6 a.m. Other states or other precincts will have theirs open at 7 a.m. Even just the discrepancies amongst those can count as a voter suppression tactic, because you don't even know like how to get the information that you need to get to the polls. But that's a big one. It's a Tuesday. It interferes with people's work schedules. Your employer typically is not going to give you a chance to show up late for work or leave work early or be late on your lunch break if you have to run over there on a lunch break. And if the lines are long, right, so people face real penalties at work. So that in and of itself could be a voter suppression tactic. Now, the remedy to that is to open up the early voting period. So a lot of states have opened that and said we want to have 2 weeks or 3 weeks where we give people a chance to vote early, many days in advance, or like open weekend voting for several weekends ahead of the actual election day. Those are all good remedies, and that does open up a chance for a lot of people that they otherwise wouldn't have. But then again, you get messages like Trump in 2020 was telling people don't vote early. And just sowing distrust in the early voting the whole process. This time around, the Republicans are telling their folks, please do vote early. Okay, so we're starting to see a shift in who's voting early. But yeah, the mail-in ballots, all that stuff is kind of feeding into people's nervousness and jitteriness over the election.
Yeah, I know a couple of friends back home in my hometown. They're we're on the Democratic side of the party, but they're terrified of voting early just out of fear of the whole issue where people were getting kicked out of voters registration. Even that instilled fear in them of if I vote early, my vote might not even get there to where it needs to be. So
right. And that's the thing about especially the mail-in ballots. So the thing that I've been telling people when this comes up is please, like your best bet right now, 2024, is try to vote early in person. So go to the actual precinct, cast your ballot in person. That way you bank your vote, okay? And that way all the canvassers that get out the vote people can concentrate on the people who haven't yet voted.
Right.
But that's also a hedge against what kind of shenanigans might go on actual election day. Because you all saw the Madison Square Garden rally last night. They're raising the temperature. I think they're inciting violence. I think they're trying to rile up people to do violence. I think I'm particularly worried about particular precincts in blue areas, especially in urban areas, which tend to vote Democratic. Like, I'm not under any illusion that there's going to be a peaceful day that day.
Yeah.
Like all across there may be it may be one place, two places, but the fact is I'm trying to get people to vote early so that if shenanigans do happen on election day, we will have accounted for that already somehow.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, you've given a good example of voter suppression tactics. Have you seen any new ones in the coming years, especially with this 2024 election that have emerged?
So there was one that was coming out in 2020 that I think is being replicated in some places now, and that was in Georgia, where they said it's illegal to give people standing in line to vote, it's illegal to give them water. Okay, so what was happening? Voter suppression tactic is make the lines as long as possible. Okay, so on social media, a lot of us would be looking at these long lines and simultaneously going, yeah, this is great. People are dedicated and they're standing out there to vote and they're never going to give up. But at the same time, what you're seeing when you look at that long line and you're going rah rah, like you're also seeing voter suppression in action. Because to have that long line and to make people stand there, sometimes in Atlanta, we were talking about 4, 5, 6 hours, okay? So, and you were allowed to bring your own water, and but you weren't allowed to go and pass out water. Why? Because they were like, you're potentially buying votes with that water. Well, that was BS, okay? It's just a basic humanitarian thing, right? People need access to water when they're standing in lines like that. But that would be an example of something that seems like way over the line, and yet Republicans were going for this. They were totally going for this. So now the message that people send out is like, tell people to bring their own food and water when they go to stand in line, because you don't know how long that line's going to be. Another thing that's new, like in Indiana, so I think we were talking when we did that event the other day, I registered a lot of people in Richmond, and I would go door to door. And just, basically I would be asking people, what are their issues that they care about, right? And in the process of that conversation, I would say, like, are you registered to vote? Do you want to get registered? And I would have the form right there with me. I would have a paper form. You can also register online. But it was really easy to fill out that form in the last several cycles. Well, what I noticed this year is there's extra hurdles for someone like me who's trying to fill this out on behalf of another person and turn it in. And I would always say to somebody, I'm going to go to the courthouse and turn this in for you, and you're going to get a receipt in the mail. Like, is that okay with you? And they were like, but if you do that, you're trying to do them a favor. Well, now there's a lot of extra the form has changed, and there's a lot of extra hoops for someone like me to jump through in order to get someone else registered. And the Indiana Secretary of State, Diego Morales, he's the one like implementing our elections. He's met twice with Viktor Orban, the fascist dictator of Hungary. Why is the Indiana Secretary of State meeting with Hungary's leader? Why? Okay, they're not conducting business. I guarantee you he's learning how to do vote suppression. That's what's going on. Yeah. And don't even get me started on Ohio, because they're out of control. Ohio's out of control, as you know. Yeah.
I went and did my internship over the summer at the county building, and that was just like food stamps, applications, and things like that. And usually when you apply for that, they ask you at the end if you want to vote.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people who filled out the paper, but even submitting the paper from there.
Yeah.
I don't even want to talk about it. It was
the
worst part of my summer internship.
Yeah. So, can I say another thing? So Ohio, they have a ballot measure this year, issue 1, and it's about gerrymandering, right? And so if you vote for the Ohio voters, if they vote yes on issue 1, what that's going to do is effectively end the Republican gerrymandering that's been going on in Ohio, because it's going to set up a citizens commission to draw the electoral maps. They have the people who put the measure on the ballot worded it in such a convoluted way that if you read that, you're going to be more inclined to vote no, to think that if I vote no, that's how I end gerrymandering in Ohio. That's how convoluted the language is. So they kind of did an Orwellian thing there with their language. But what I was going to say was so two things. That's the gerrymandering that happens is another you can think of it as another voter suppression tactic, because with gerrymandering, the politicians are choosing their voters. And that is not the system we have. The system we're supposed to have is the voters choose their representatives. I'm putting that in air quotes. Okay. The voters are supposed to choose their reps. With gerrymandering, they're looking at these maps of how people voted, and they're carving up the territory. Why is this a voter suppression tactic? Well, because in effect, once you've gerrymandered it in such a way, it shields the politician from any kind of accountability, let alone meaningful accountability. Once they've got it gerrymandered, so they've chosen their own voters, then they can basically do whatever they want, and they don't have to answer to their constituents, because in effect they're not their constituents anymore, right? It gives the politicians free rein. And the reason I call that a voter suppression tactic is because you hear this all the time, and people are right when they say, well, I voted and it didn't change anything, it didn't do any good. And if you are in a situation that's been heavily gerrymandered like that, you're absolutely right. That is part of the problem, right? So it's wonderful when you can get, and that's due to a citizens initiative, to even get that on the ballot. Indiana doesn't have citizens initiatives. We don't have that right. Okay, that's another thing. All these states are different. We don't have, we can't put reproductive access on our ballot for people to vote on, even though 80% of people voters in Indiana want reproductive rights and don't want this 6-week abortion ban. Anyway, so that was one point. So that gerrymandering is a voter suppression tactic. But the other thing I would say is a lot of these voter suppression tactics, whether in the short term or eventually, they start to draw a backlash. Okay, so when people find out, what do you mean, either the gerrymandering, you explain that to them, or what do you mean we can't have people giving us a bottle of water in this 4-hour line? It gets people rightfully angry. Right. And then that's a pushback, because when people see what's been going on, a lot of people will be more inclined, hell no, you're not taking this away from us, right? And so voter suppression can backfire. And I think in the 2024 elections, based on what I'm seeing so far with the early voting, I think it is backfiring. Because I think we're seeing people are blowing out the records for early voting. In Georgia, I think in Michigan, Arizona's going strong on their early vote. So people are really starting to see what's at stake with this.
Earlier, I'm gonna go back to a point, sorry. Earlier when you were mentioning the lines being long in Georgia, you mentioned social media. I'm curious to see how you think social media has influenced voter suppression tactics, either negatively, positively.
Yeah, so social media definitely cuts both ways, right? There was I think one of the images maybe of either a ballot box on fire or there was an image of a postal worker like dumping ballots in the woods. Like there were these images I was hearing about that were circulating on Twitter, now called X, but I call it Twitter, where like they traced it back, and it had origins in Russia. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those images of, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, but some of the images you really got to check into, of like either a ballot box is on fire or there's some kind of shenanigans going on here. You want to check those out carefully, because if enough of those images are circulating, the point of those becomes, let's sow distrust in the integrity of this election, period.
Mm-hmm. Which
can then be used for anything related to like what we saw in 2020 with the Stop the Steal, in air quotes, movement. Mm-hmm. So that was all about casting doubt on the integrity of the election. That's a very damaging thing to do. Casting doubt on the integrity of the election feeds into voter suppression, because it just goes to that whole idea of like, why bother voting? Like, none of this is going to do any good anyway. So that you can see how that kind of thing can be voter suppression. You see a lot of stuff on social media, just that why bother, mm-hmm. the why bother trope. That to me is just basic defeatism. And it does, I mean, it may not be intentionally part of a voter suppression like toolkit, but it often does have that effect on people. So I try to call that out when I see it, just like label it defeatism, and just like we're not gonna go with that. We're gonna push on. And so like, and then the other thing that you see cutting the other direction is the viral kind of, the enthusiasm people have about showing that they already did vote, talking about why they voted, mm-hmm. why the stakes are so high for them. A lot of people this year are saying like, I'm voting for my daughter, I'm voting for the entire LGBTQ community. Like, you know, like people are just saying like, this is what this is about for me. This is not about me. This is about these people that I love, or these people I don't even know, but this group of people matters to me, right? Mm-hmm. So you're seeing a lot of that, and you're seeing a lot of also like the elders who are kind of saying, this is what we went through to get the vote. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a image of a woman the other day who had like, she came to the polls with like some of the Jim Crow stuff that she had gone through when she was much, much younger, and she had that like pinned to her shirt. She's like, this is what we had to go through to get the right to vote. You know, we are not stepping down now. We are not backing off. We will go through whatever we have to like, the stakes are way too high. Yeah.
And then how would you say, I guess kind of going into that, you mentioned a bunch of marginalized groups in your statement before. Yeah. How does voter suppression tactics affect those marginalized communities?
So it like a lot of it's targeted to marginalized communities, right. Okay? Especially Black and brown communities. There will be, this is another one that's happening now. In Indiana, I think it's Todd Rokita, the Attorney General. It might be Diego Morales, the Secretary of State, but it's one of these two, who's like in contact with, and Frank LaRose in Ohio is doing this too, in touch with the Department of Homeland Security, saying, hey, we requested this list of names of undocumented people so we can make sure they're not on the voting rolls. And anyway, like the point is, like that's probably gonna hit the Latinx community the hardest, most likely. And then you get like specific voter suppression tactics in heavily African American communities where they'll take out ballot boxes like for the return of the mail ballots. They'll make sure the lines are as long as possible, that kind of thing. So these are tactics that clearly are meant to target specific groups. They're even now like, there's a new thing that I'm seeing this year. Women who've changed women who got married and changed their last name are sometimes running into a snag with their photo ID, like the name not matching up exactly or what have you. There's that. I've even heard of instances where they're allowing husbands to go into the ballot, like into the voting booth with their wives, which I believe that's illegal, but some of the poll workers are allowing something like that. And this is the other thing that's happening on social media. You might have seen this. There's a big message right now I think it's geared mostly to married white women, to be honest, saying like, your husband doesn't know how you're voting, so vote your conscience.
Yeah. And
it's like, it's about like, there are a lot of women who are facing abusive situations and like would be in big trouble if their husband knew the way they're voting. And so like, they're trying to get the message out. Your vote is private. Your vote is like, no one knows how you voted, so vote how you want to.
Yeah.
But then if you got poll workers saying, oh yeah, he could go in there with you, that's fine. I believe that's illegal. It should be illegal.
I mean, it would make sense for it to be illegal.
Yeah.
But how everything's going, you never know.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing. So the poll workers, props to the poll workers, because that's a hard job. But the poll workers they get a lot of free reign too in some instances, right? A wink and a nod, okay, you can do that thing. Right? So but that just goes back to the fact that we don't have federalized elections, so it's just a patchwork of stuff. So people's individual voting experience there may be no relationship between how I experienced it, how you experienced it, we may be experiencing it under such different circumstances because of where we're voting, who we are, etc. That's the nature of voting in this country, and it's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a big problem.
It definitely is. It puts a lot of different, I mean, I'm in Ohio, but my grandma's in Chicago, and even hearing how their registration went versus ours was opposite sides of the spectrum.
Exactly.
And I think I saw something on Twitter, but I can't remember what state it was in. You mentioned people like taking away ballot options, especially in African American communities. I saw something about that they closed in one of the states, at least 3 of the locations, and so people had to disperse. But they're like a lot further from where they live, so how are they going to get there? Transportation. And then you mentioned people having to take off from jobs, and jobs don't care if you're going to vote, if you're going to lunch, time, strengths, you gotta be there. They
don't care. Yeah, so you're risking your job. Transportation, I don't even think I mentioned that, but that's another huge one, transportation, right? A lot of people in this town of Richmond do not have transportation. They may not have smartphones. Like, the information is not even getting to people.
Yeah.
Let alone the transportation. How am I going to even get there? So, other countries have made this so much easier on people.
Yeah. Go USA.
Go USA. Right.
Let me see if there's anything else. Do you have any tips, words of encouragement for people just to get out and vote, or how to deal with voter suppression tactics, or what to look for?
Let's see. So I would say check out your ballot before you go. Like, there are places where you can look at sample ballots and inform yourself as best you can as to what to expect when you get there. Voting is, for a lot of students, I'm starting to understand that voting is like intimidating or scary for people, and I really wish that weren't the case. So the more you can kind of look at how it's going to go beforehand, the better off. Go with friends. Go with one or two other people, I would say. If you're in a situation where you might experience a line, definitely bring your water and your food. But the thing I want to really emphasize to people, and especially like most of the students I'm in touch with, are a little bit jaded with regard to the political structures in the United States, like rightfully so. And so sometimes students are shocked when they hear that I go out and like do voter registration and like all this stuff. Like, why? Do you really believe in this, Jo? Like, so here's my thing. I leave no terrain. There's no ground that I will cede in the political terrain. Okay, voting is the main way that some of the power structures that we're up against get reinforced, right? And it's also a way that they can change. But I will say this, for students who are like discouraged and don't see voting as a way to change things, I always say, think of voting less as an offensive weapon that you're going to use to change what you don't like. Think of it as a defensive weapon. Think of it as the shield that you're holding up so that you're trying to prevent further damage to yourself while you're behind that shield doing the organizing work. Okay, because it's the organizing work that's going to get you that change. But you better hold up your shield, because Republicans or whoever else, they're coming against us. And they are, in that process, they are making our terrain much, much, much more difficult. Right. Whether it's like we're organizing for different kinds of civil rights, reproductive rights, union organizing, that terrain is defined by electoral politics. So it's not very useful for us to say, I'm just not going to vote, because they're coming at us. It is an assault. They are coming at us. So we have to throw up our shield. And that's how I think of voting.
That's fair. I feel like if somebody would have explained voting to me that way, I would have been much less nervous about it. But I mean, for a lot of our generation, it's the first big election we're voting in, so.
Well, you picked a good one. For the first, like, this is a big one. Like, this really, like, they've been saying my whole life, this is the biggest election. And they were right, like, every time it was. And it definitely is right now. It definitely is right now. Because, like, think about it. If in 2000, the Supreme Court had not thrown the election to George W. Bush, even, so 2000, like September 11th, A, may not have happened. B, if it did happen, the U.S. response, I think, would have been very different.
Yeah.
Right? And so that would have changed the course of history in and of itself. And then there are all these times, right? 2004, the country was pretty angry with George W. Bush, but they used LGBTQ hate. They stirred that up, and that was the thing that got people turning out, and that's what got him reelected. So, like, you can just see these moments where things could turn. But 2024, biggest election, most important election of my lifetime, and of your lifetime.
Yeah,
and I hope, like,
too,
I hope it comes out the right way.
You and me both.
Yeah. I don't have a plan B. I mean, I need this to go the right way.
Yeah.
Things are going to change very drastically if it doesn't go the right way.
My plan B is to go to grad school in another country.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Let me see. That's all the questions I have for you.
All right.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank
you
you
for all the information.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
For CSJ updates in general or podcast updates, you can follow the Earlham CSJ page. Also follow our YouTube page at Troublemakers for Justice. Have a great time and see you all next time.